Thank you, Vincent. Thank you to the organizers and to TSC for inviting me. I'm sorry, but I'll have to leave immediately after the speech. I need to catch a train to go to Brussels. Sorry for that. So coming to our topic, who is going to pay? Who is going to foot the bill? This is a question that applies to climate in particular, but all common goods. So I'd like to use this report as a basis. Why do we need to pay? Well, one needs to pay, but it's not because intrinsically a carbon-free economy would be more costly, more expensive than a carbon based on fossil fuels. Because the transition itself, transition is costly. Why is it costly? Because the mechanisms of this transition, well, there are a number of them, the progress, technical progress, sobriety, but the main culprit is the replacement of the fossil fuel by capital. And this is easy to understand. Look at a windmill. What is a solar farm? What is a nuclear plant? Well, it's capital, basically. Capital in order to get the proper supply of energy at the proper cost, but the capital required for this is much, much higher. So from this angle, I think this is the generic mechanism. If you rely on this reasoning, you understand easily that it requires a lot of investment, 70 billions for France. I mean, look at the overall amount, the massive, the bulk of it. And there are other estimates for the UK, for the European Union. So altogether, 2.5 points of GDP per year in 2030, during the next 50 years. So it's really a lot. And it makes inroads in your purchasing power because the money will have to be found somewhere. And, purchasing power has become the hot item these days. So it is indeed a question which raises fears. Of course, what is expensive, costly for us is even more costly for emerging countries, because in emerging countries, the amount of investment as a ratio of the GDP is twice what it is for us. And the cost of capital is much higher there. While we have access to capital, let's say 3-4% of interest rate, as far as they are concerned, the percentage is 7 to 8%. So the future of the planet is a challenge here, but in emerging countries like India, China, Indonesia, and for obvious reasons, these countries use fossil fuels and technology because it's not as capital intensive, and the operating costs, of course, are higher. So this is my starting point. Next. How can we pilot this transition, steer it? And this is the common good topic. I'd like to repeat what Adam Smith said. It's not by being kind to the butcher that you can live. It has to be selfishness. But it doesn't apply here because in our case, it's not about being selfish. It's about protecting a common good, which is based on the public policies. So what can we do? Well, there's been, and there still is a debate among economists, those who are in favor of a policy based of carbon tariffs exclusively, because it's more efficient from the economic point of view. It gives a much wider choice. It's technologically free. In other words, individual actors are free to act the way they want. But we've moved away from this policy, and no country has a policy which is exclusively based on prices, even though Scandinavian countries are trying hard to achieve that goal. What else can we do? We can use tariffs, We've tried this approach in France, and we could see that it triggered a reaction. I have the yellow jackets, quote unquote, as an example. The Germans tried something else. If you change your boiler, you have to buy a heat pump. Hence the revolt of boilers, and the government said, no way, we can't do this. So it's no big help. And then American solution, which is subsidies. And this led to the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which is generous and effective, efficient. In 1 year, investment for climate has made progress by 36% increase, which is a great success. It's extremely costly, as it is exclusively based on subsidies. Subsidies which are a burden on the state funding. And it's not that it lead to greater economies. I mean, you're not saving fossil fuels. It can do so. It can lead to that objective if indeed the effect on households and companies is effective. But per se, it's not really a big help. So Europe has gone for a so-called mixed strategy based on tariffs with the ETS mechanism for consuming companies, ITS2 in the future for transport and households or buildings. The price of carbon will be capped on that last market, but it's bound to become very effective starting 2010. So France has gone for a so-called mixed strategy, more balanced, that has advantages in terms of credibility. So maybe it will be more easy to accept the strategy based on carbon tariffs, I think. So this is the current situation. As you know, we have a new regulations and laws for a substantial horizon by 2030 reduction, and then the Commission has come up with an objective by 2040, going for that objective. So much on regulation and legislation, which is about implementing. It starts being implemented, but it depends on each individual choice, and the choices made by individuals and corporate sector. How can we make the 60 billion in France? Let's say we said that half would come from private sources and the rest from public sources. We can discuss this 50-50 sharing. Why is it half public, half private? Because some things are owned by a public sector. A significant part of infrastructures are based on public investment, and then you have private initiatives, households, even small corporations, companies won't be in a position to fully fund this transition unless they are properly supported. The figures, the data is that renovating a house, buying an EV for middle-income families represent 1 year of investment, so it's extremely heavy in terms of investments, caught in view of the current political situation. But even before that, it wouldn't be feasible unless it generates a greater support by public, by the government. It requires about 30 billion central state and local authorities by redeploying resources, new levies, new taxes. How to distribute this? Well, this, of course, is a political decision. But the other issue, which is not a political issue, is it necessary? Yes, it is indeed necessary. So, in other words, we need to open up that avenue. We need to start discussions on the European constraints. I think they are far too tight, these constraints, too strict, because the new rules of the Stability Pact leave no room for going into indebtedness to fund climate transition, and this includes local authorities that would have to incur debts in order to fund or finance the renovation of public buildings, hospitals and schools, among others. So it is a challenge. Last point, last questions. I'll be brief, so we leave some room for questions from you. Is it necessary, or can we, let's say, postpone? So the question is raised because a number of actors are already taking a stand, including some partners who might eventually become members of the government in Europe, because with the new majority at the European Council, probably is going to wonder about the time frame to ponder and discuss. I have two arguments against changing the time frame. The first one, if this were the case, Europe would be taking on a very heavy responsibility. Europe so far has been extremely brave. When in 2019, the Trump administration was about to leave the Paris Accord or agreement, where Europe decided to stay with it by making more commitments and by trying to be the driving force for others to have this carrying effect. Now, if the European Union changes its position, it will incur very significant responsibilities. Why is that? Because the Paris Agreement or Accord has been effective. I see Laurence Tubiana is coming in. This is a perfect synchronization. I can't read the word. Christian Grolier, who is sitting next to her, who is very critical of the Paris Agreement, is very effective. It is inadequate, but we were able to see that the pace at which carbon emissions is slowing down, so it is effective. No way, we cannot possibly reach on that pact. That would be very bad if we want to protect our climate and protect the planet. Now, the other thing I'd like to elaborate upon, suppose we slow down an action from the industrial perspective. It means that corporation, industrial companies will have to change the course and invest both on a carbon-free, neutral, and economy and traditional economy. Now, for car manufacturers, the car industry, that will be a very significant change. It requires heavy investments, especially as Europe is lagging behind China, among other countries. So we could, of course, a few years ago, we were still wondering whether it was a reasonable challenge to go for the e-vehicle. So the decision has been made, and European and French industries in particular started investing in the transition towards a zero-carbon economy. Tavares, of course, was not the main advocate, as you will know, of this transition. The country that was opposed to it, he said, don't change tack. You can't do both at the same time. You can't both invest on EVs and on traditional cars. It's not possible. From that perspective, sorry for that. I think that it would not be responsible. It would be reasonable to go back. Maybe the German industry has the possibility to do both at the same time. This is not the case. As European economy as a whole. So this is a crucial debate indeed. We need to ask the right questions. Of course, political decisions, well, these are essentially political choices, but then you have to explain to the politicians what the consequences their choices would entail. Thank you. Christian. Thank you, Jean. In relation with what you said at the end about private investments and the need to revise them, in other words, the indispensable stability, something occurs to me. A problem, it's been a problem for many years. I'm referring to the credibility of public commitments, stability of rules, and legislation to come, which is really a challenge for corporate leaders. For instance, suppose I invest for this or that, and a new government comes in and decides to change tax, and it's not that essential. So what about profitability? The solvency of this corporation would be at stake, would be a challenge. So how can you limit the uncertainty that floats around? How can we convince, make sure that corporate managers are ready to go that way? Yeah, this is a crucial question. So I'm convinced for one. The transition will happen. It will start with the companies. I mean, private decisions. Public powers will have a role to play, of course. But when it comes to private companies, they don't have the leverage to initiate this momentum. So what they've done is taken commitments at European, international, and European levels. So that 2 levels, if you like, where we're accountable for the commitments we've made so far. Is it enough? I don't know yet. But clearly, we see that this strong commitment, of course, this is what we do. Traditionally, we make or we take strong international commitments. Sorry, in order to put constraints on what we decide, to regulate ourselves, in other words. So I think it's vital that this commitment is maintained, which doesn't mean that we don't have any leeway. We have leeway on the modalities of funding. For instance, the way we fund, you can, for instance, shift or replace private funding to public funding to some extent. You can also use different levers, debt level, taxes, redeployment. So there is a certain leeway. But this credibility, once again, is crucial.